Great. All right. Well, we might kick off. Thanks very much, everybody who are online at the moment. I am expecting a few more, and I've sent a reminder, so hopefully a few will log in as we progress. But I am recording this for those people that can't be here today, so they'll certainly have an opportunity to catch up and catch up on what we're covering today. So this is our last sort of catch up for the Soil CRC Community of Practice for the southern region. So as a bit of background, we've got people from South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales online at the moment, and that's where the cohort of the Community of Practice come from, and we've been meeting for nearly 2 years and getting upskilled on some soil science through the Soil CRC and Building Land Care Capacity Project. So, like I said, the project's winding up now, but hopefully there will be an opportunity to go into phase 2. So we are negotiating with the Australian government of perhaps extending the project or going into a second phase. So there should be an opportunity for you guys to continue to connect with us if you like, and engage and continue to share information and build your capacity. So as we're coming to the end, there'll be a survey. So look out for that in the next day or two, and that'll just finish up the project for this phase at least. But today, so we've been able to get together, and although we haven't been able to get out into the paddock to do the soil pit stuff and soil characterisation like we had hoped to, but I thought it's still worthwhile going through the process and talking about the process of soil pits and some of the protocol that you could follow, and tools and resources that you could use to support that process of soil characterisation and soil pit as an extension tool, working with growers, or even just in your own plots, determining where you might have trials or those sort of things. So I'm very happy to welcome Brian Hughes and Amanda Chappell, who are based in South Australia from PIRSA, and also David Rees and Rebecca Mitchell from Agriculture Victoria, who will talk a bit more about accessing soil data and using soil data that's available online, or soil characterisations that have already been done in the past that are able to be accessed and used just as a resource and to help improve your information about what soil characterisation has already been done. So we'll kick off with Brian and Amanda first. So yeah, we really appreciate you coming on board, and I'll be typing some stuff in the chat. So if anyone's got any comments they'd like to make, then please pop it in the chat, and or any questions. So we'll kick off. Thanks very much, Brian and Amanda.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me all right. I'll just put that PowerPoint on. I was just feeling that I've got far too much here, so I'll just flick through it a bit, I think, as we go. And so originally just talking a bit about some of the planning considerations, the assessment stuff, some of the resources that are around, and I suppose just a little bit on the South Australian sort of soil data that's online. And some of you will know some of this stuff. When I started thinking about what we do when we look for soil pits, it's probably I actually have learned something over the years, so that was good. Actually came up with a few things, that was good. And I suppose this is probably only the second time I've tried to do this online rather than actually in the paddock, so we'll see how that goes as well, I suppose.
Yeah. So your screen at the moment is still it's not in presentation view, so I'm not sure if you can share this.
Presentation view here. So what am I doing?
Just need to share the screen that's in presentation view. So I'm not sure if you've selected the screen.
Sorry. Yeah, it says on screen. What am I doing? I got the expert. You are screen sharing, it says there. So. What am I in? Sorry, Amanda's come in to sort me out, I think. So
that's okay.
Stop it. Yep. That I suppose, yeah. Okay, that better?
So now we can see it's sort of in.
No, still, it's just not that one. It's this one, I think.
Yeah, presentation viewer.
Just go back to that other one, I think.
It's tricky when you've got a few different screens to choose from.
Yeah, yeah.
I might just ask Rebecca to take notes for when we get to ours.
That's okay. That looks great, Brian.
How are you going now? Which one have you got now?
Yeah, perfect.
That's the right one?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Good
All right.
job.
Anyway, there we go. So the next problem, I've got to move this. Okay. All right. So location. Let's talk about location. I suppose this example of photo there, you can actually see actually digging with a massive excavator, but we've actually kept the topsoil and the subsoil separate, as you can see there, so they can put them back in the right order. But when you sort of think about the location, it really, you really want to make sure you're on the soil type that you're selecting. Just got to turn these phones off. And how long it's going to be open for. So basically, sometimes with pits, we've left them open permanently. So in that case, you want to stick it in the corner of the paddock if you can, so it can be fenced off. Whether you need to use it for field days, you need to be able to actually get to it if it's a field day, and also even things like excavators normally come on pretty big trucks, so you don't want it too far in the farm, into the farm, because they'll want to take it off probably on a fairly stable spot. And I suppose just some of the safety issues, things like underground water and power. If there's a water line there, you'll find it when you dig the pit, which I've found a couple of times. So pit dimensions, certainly for field days, I normally prefer sort of a T-shaped type of one where you basically have the face on the top of the T and you have a ramp going down to that. If it's just a basic soil survey, you really just dig a hole with a bit of a wedge on it, just so you can sort of get into it really. And I suppose one thing I always find important often with the operators is really just having a good discussion with them beforehand, just to make sure they don't disturb the face wall when they're digging it. And particularly if they're new to digging soil pits, you really need to, if you're digging a T, you'll actually dig across the top part of the T first, I suppose, and you'll certainly smear stuff on the face that you want to use, but you won't actually disturb it too much. Normally we max out at about 1.5, 1.6 meters deep, and I suppose on really unstable soils that's probably even too deep. So if you're on a soil over water table or something like that, you may want to go shallower than that as well. And there's nothing worse than going to when farmers have dug your pit and it's 2.5 meters deep, and you don't want soil that deep over your head in case it caves in. The pit face, I've talked a bit about this pit face, just making sure the operator doesn't damage it. And the other thing is to aim to have the pit face so that you've got the sun in the right place when you take your photographs, if you want to photograph it. So a lot of ours, we certainly do, north, or if it's a morning pit, we'll do it sort of more northeast. If it's sort of afternoon, it might be more northwest, is where we've got that I suppose face, so that we can get sun over that face when we've got it ready. Cleaning the pit face, I always find it easy to do some when you dig it. Often some soils get really hard after they've been sitting there for a while, and you need sort of a flat-edged spade or a shovel, small mattock or geology pick and knife, and really, clean it off initially and take your photographs, but also you can you'll have to clean it again if you've got a field day in a week or two's time, and removing sort of a couple of inches off the face of it as you do, you can get rid of all that smeared stuff. Also learned over time to take a block of wood with me for field days and things that you may need to put in the base if it's wet, and certainly if it's a couple of weeks after, when you're having a field day, you might have to pump some water out of it as well. And the pit on the right there at Lock, actually at the field day on that one, it doesn't look very wet, but there's clay down the bottom. I actually lost rubber boots in the bottom of that somewhere when we did it. Now, soil pit assessment, and I suppose I just thought the photo on the right there now, what's wrong with this one? This is one of my very early ones. When I look back, I'm a bit embarrassed about, well, I can't remember why we left pock marks all over it. So, have a think about, you really want to try and avoid those shadows, I suppose, on your pit faces when you're photographing it. So that would have been much better done with I suppose a shovel and much straighter edges on it in that case. So when you're assessing them, clean them off first, avoid the shadows if you can, and clean from the top, make a straight face on sand or other soils. You have to sort of pick away a bit and try and get some of the structure showing without having too much shadowing. Always describe and photograph before you sample, as you sort of destroy the face when you're sampling. Identify the layers first, describe them, photograph them, sample in that order. And ideally you need a pit soil tape. You can actually purchase the ones like the ones I've got there, and various people have made their own in other ways as well, and can probably find out where we got those from. We did buy some fairly recently, but I can't quite remember off the top of my head. So Cameron, soil description sheet, I'll show you some examples which are a bit more elaborate than probably what you need, but have some sort of sheet which sort of helps you, remind you to do all the things that you want to measure on it, I suppose. There's a range of textbooks which we can show, and particularly the Soil and Land Survey Handbook is sort of the Bible and all this sort of stuff. And you'll need some sort of soil kit, and which will include your water bottle, your pH kit and tray, some acid if you're in South Australia looking at calcareous soils, a colour book, something for just doing dispersions. Then if you want to do, you may need to sift the soil if it's got a lot of rock in it. We use magnets for some things, and a soil tape and nails and things. So I suppose moving on to the actual act of doing the soil, so soil description, and there's lots of stuff around on this, so I'm just touching on it a bit. Normally, certainly with a soil pit, we'd want some sort of landform information, the element, some GPS location, so you can use it forever, I suppose. And I sort of say that because back in the 80s and 90s, the pits that we did on places like Eyre Peninsula are still being used, and to realise at the time that how long that information lasts for and gets used. Assessment of surface structure, vegetation, land use, geology, if you know it, and some routing depth information. Normally, this sort of across the pit itself, and then for each layer, basically recording the depths, linking those layers to horizons. If you know about horizons, and if not, they're in the yellow book, I suppose. We'll tell you about those. Where layers are particularly too thick, you may want to subsample those into smaller layers. So if they're getting 30, 50 centimetre increments, if you've got a layer that's very consistent for a metre, split it up, I suppose is what I'm saying. And then for each layer, there's a range of basic tests that you do in the field. So texture, colour, pH, acid reactions in South Australia, coarse fragment segregations, carbonate layers. And in some soils, you may want to do a field dispersion or water appellants test, and certainly assess the root growth as you're going down on those. So this is an example of a sort of elaborate soil description sheet. I'm not expecting you wouldn't need all those, but something a bit similar like that. If you make something up which has those core things that you want to look at, and that just gives you a bit more rigor to what you're doing. If you're doing a whole range of pits, I suppose you'll sort of end up testing them for the same sorts of things. Now, just sort of moving on. So I'll just briefly skip through some of this stuff, which will be really quick because there's a lot of stuff in this. So certainly looking at, as I said, the first thing at a soil pit is really looking at the layers. And this is one from I suppose the mid-north, where you've got an A horizon, organic dark and sort of surface. You've got a washed out sort of layer, which can be called A2 or E horizons, depending where you're from. We're moving into the B horizons, where the clay has accumulated. Further down, we're looking at where carbonates accumulated, and down the bottom of the pit, we're seeing some of the substrate material there, and understanding of that is pretty important for a lot of our South Australian soils, and even more so in sort of horticulture. And the layer thing, I said, firstly do that. Texture, I'll just flick. I mean, you all know how to do textures, and the interpretation of texture really relates to a lot of the soil characteristics. So the clay content is dictating a lot of the moisture characteristics and other things. I won't go into that too much. Structure, there is a lot of information on structure around, but you're really trying to have a look at understanding whether it's got a good crumbly sort of structure. Is it hard setting? Sandy soil often really doesn't have much structure, but it just sits there. Have we got things like columns, and which may be linked to sodic soils, and I suppose again looking at the structure in terms of where the roots are as well is useful in terms of sort of understanding whether you've got sort of subsoil limitations in your soil as well. Dispersion, you would have all seen these. You can do these in the field and just have a bit of a quick look and just see whether it slakes and whether it disperses. Again, when you're looking at I suppose subsoils in particular and whether they're limiting root growth, just by placing your soil into, so you need some distilled water or rainwater with you to do these. Colour, there's multiple colour charts around, but the colour will tell you a fair bit about some of the characteristics of the soils in terms of drainage in particular. So bright red will indicate good aeration and drainage, while some of the paler browns and yellows or mottled horizons, so certainly record models if you're describing your soils, will indicate poor drainage, and then very pale colours can indicate sort of low fertility, while sort of dark, high organic soils will indicate the opposite. And for South Australia and I suppose parts of Victoria, the understanding of the carbonate in the soil is quite important. This is not actually in the yellow book, but it's really the method that's used throughout the sort of irrigation districts in the Mallee and Eyre Peninsula, is to really classify the carbonate layer into. So class 1, we have I suppose a classification system which is really fine carbonate in clay, and it's often associated with sort of poor drainage and root growth, and also some of the subsoil toxicity, things like boron and salt that we see. Class 2 is sort of sheet or boulder or laminar calcrete, and I suppose the class 3s are split into different categories depending how many fragments there are. Often we find class 3B and 3C, the roots actually grow through those quite well, even though they look quite rocky. And that's the deeper class 1 or the 3A is where we start seeing some of the restrictions to root growth. And class 4 occurs in very sandy matrices. But so understanding that actually gives us a sort of a model, I suppose, for some of the certainly irrigation soil surveys and where the roots are likely to grow and where some of the toxicities occur. Water repellents, again, there are tests around for water repellents, and you can have a bit of ethanol in your kit if you want, or just you can use the water test as well, just to see how long it is for water to move into the soil. So some of the properties can't be observed through the field, so you then go down your path of sampling the layers and getting some chemical analysis done. For generally, we would sort of do a range of things from pH, salt, toxicity, things like chloride and boron, exchangeable cations. We may get carbonate percentage done, depending on the soil, and then a range of the fertility measurements, so things like phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, and the trace elements, and certainly organic carbon. And I suppose in some cases we've looked at some of the the biological tests on the surface to give us an idea of some of that sort of stuff as well, and in some cases more detail on the physical tests. So we have done bulk densities or whatever from the pit to look at some of the physical characteristics as well. But certainly most of the historic ones have had this sort of range of, I suppose, the chemical tests from either fertility or toxicity. Again, for the the carbon protocols, if you're going to try and measure, you need a bulk density. It goes with your carbon figures, so to calculate those sorts of things. And that's then presented, I suppose, in some of the results. So I suppose good soil description, give you some information, hopefully, on the range of those characteristics. So I talked about some of the physical barriers to the root growth in that soil type, whether it's susceptible to waterlogging, salinity hazard, whether it's got a water table, you'll find out. What's the deep drainage characteristics, any chemical barriers to root growth, soil pH, and I suppose the implications of that, and general fertility status, and also just that root zone depth. And my experience, I think I've probably only seen really 2 soil pits over the hundreds I've looked at, probably where I've seen really good root growth all the way down, interesting enough, which probably tells us something about our soils. And you can calculate things like total and readily available water holding capacity from that characteristics. Now, I think I'm going all right for time still, aren't I, Felicity? We've got a bit more. So that's really 101 soil pits and description in 15 minutes, which is probably a bit much. So some of the sort of support things around, I suppose, I was just going to talk about that, the Australian Soil and Land Survey Handbook. See that one, the yellow book, is that one. So that's really, if you're getting into a lot of soil description work, that's really a standard definitions across Australia that are used for texture and all those characteristics, and it's really like a little Bible, I suppose. So if you're wanting to be consistent in how you do things, it's really good to get one of those, and you can, and it's got the I suppose the site elements through to the soil description characteristics as well, and that's constantly being revised and updated. I think they would hope to eventually have it as an electronic book where you can sort of hook in and see photos of different things on the web. Monthly colour chart you need is one of those. If you're going to do colours consistently, and you can match the colours to that. And I suppose the so I probably should get off of that. Anyway, so monthly colour chart, we've actually found some of the cheaper ones aren't particularly good. So you need to make sure you're getting one that's a true monthly colour chart, not a cheap version, because the colour is a bit different to some of the others. And I suppose the other books, which there is an Australian soil classification if you want to get into a classification system for your soil, and that I suppose is the uniform Australian one, and I think is much easier. You can actually classify your soil quite quickly using that one. There's other soil classification systems through there, but if you're looking to sort of I suppose use the soil pit and use it in some sort of scientific publication, you should be classifying that soil according to the soil classification system. And I suppose in South Australia, some of the other things, we'll talk about the database in a minute. There's quite a good Soils of Southern Australia booklet, I suppose, which by Hall, which has really got a lot of good, Hall and Mashford and Co, a lot of really good information on 50 different soil groups. And we have a range of other little versions of these that we've done for field days and that, which people want them, which we sort of modify some of that stuff to make it much more simpler for farmers, but talk about texture and the implications and other things in those, and build in sort of local information and soil pit information. I suppose just moving on to the last part, there is some stuff around. A lot of soils information is now on the web, particularly through Department of Environment and Water in South Australia. Some of the main bits of that are the nature maps, data SA, environment data SA, and I suppose soil sites SA. And I'll just quickly whip through those. And the so if you look at, I suppose, the area that's really been mapped properly is marked in red in South Australia. So that's sort of what we'd call our agricultural areas. So there's sort of much more limited information on the pastoral zone and the Aboriginal lands and things. And this one's actually off of the Enviro data. So this is really looking at some soil attribute mapping, and this is a coverage of wind erosion potential, but there's something like 24 or so of these different layers. So it's really assessing from low to high wind erosion risk. On that same, you can actually hook into all the soil characterizations sites, and you can actually see all the sites are marked. And there's a lot of them when you start. So all these you can hook into the sort of a 2-page summary of that soil, which will basically include the description on the front page, some site information, and then on the second page will be some of the chemical data and I suppose the interpretation of that. So I can't remember how many of these, but there's a lot of these around the state, and a lot of them are actually getting, they're back to 1980. Some of them, some are more recent. We're still putting stuff on there as we go. Looking at nature maps again. So this is again an interpretation for acid soil risk in this case, and so there are some which link into some more land use potential as well. And another data set, I suppose, on there through Data SA, you can actually now get in, so you can get into these range of acidity and other things. I said there's 20 odd of these types of things on there. And moving through the soils of
No, that's fantastic. Thanks, thanks, Brian. Yes, it's a bit of a whirlwind, but I think you've given a great overview of the process and some pertinent things to think about. One thing that I sometimes do or have done in the past is, and this depends on where you're locating your soil pit, is to plant a variety of varieties or species selection, a soil pit, or in a place where you might be digging your soil pit. So you might have canola and wheat and barley and pasture species possibly. So that when you dig the pit, you can actually see the rooting depth of all those different plant types, and that might help, identify if lupins might not be liking to be growing in that area, and you can see that where the roots might stop growing compared to where wheat and barley might grow too, and those sort of things. So I'm not sure if you guys have done that sort of thing before.
We have done some recently on sort of ground affected by magnesia patches, and we actually dug them from the salty grounds through to the good stuff, just to try and have a look at that difference as you go, which is sort of interesting, I suppose, in the sense of there's not a distinct line where it suddenly stops growing, but a little bit the same way, I suppose, just having a look at the range. And I mean, what we tended to find is the soil probably changed in that period anyway, so that's what was driving it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a good way of looking at the different species. We certainly, well, I mean, one of the problems you have with trials is once you dig a pit in it, you sort of compromise the trial a little bit. But so near the end of the trials, we often dig some on the different treatments, more so than probably early on.
Yeah, great. Any comments from the floor?
Brian, just a technical thing. You had to cover a huge amount there, so you did really well. Just wondering about segregations, just what that were. I don't know whether people would know what segregation.
Yeah. Okay, so I suppose there's certainly in our description sheets we tend to have two measures of when you're picking up rocks in your layers. So the coarse fragments tends to be more things like the if you're hitting quartz or some sort of rock that's broken down from the parent material. Segregations we tend to use for the carbonate layers, and I suppose things like ironstone you could probably argue fit on both areas. So it's really just picking up I suppose some of the rock material, the hard material in those layers. As I said, most of us will have some sort of sifter in our kit, so we can actually push that through and get a bit of an idea of whether it's something like an ironstone soil. Is it 10% or is it 90% of the layer, which has implications for how you calculate things like water holding capacity and things. But yeah, it's probably more. I mean, the level that people get into the soil description probably sort of depends a bit how many they're doing, but certainly as if the data's ending up on a state database, you want to get it to a certain degree, I suppose. That'd be my comment, and I imagine they do in Victoria as well, David.
Yeah.
And you have to be fairly consistent in what you're calling things as such.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, we haven't got as much carbonators you have. We mainly have ironstone, so or buckshot as people call it. So anyway, that's just a little minor minor thing.
All right. Now,
did you have a comment or?
I just wanted to say thanks to Brian. He's in our region, so we benefit from his expertise, but it's brilliant to hear him, and yeah, we're very lucky to have him around.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's good.
So I did I popped a few things in the chat, Brian, just referencing some videos that are on Soil Science Australia's website. They've gone through and done some horizon stuff and some soil texturing videos. I've also referenced the PIRSA improved grazing group, because I think you and a couple of others have done some great soil characterization and soil pit videoing there, which is for the participants just to refer back to and watch over and over about how it's done and picking up on a few of those tips and tricks and things.
Yeah, we did. That's right. The big website has 4 soil pits we did, which were all set up for field day that got cancelled because of the and so we did do that and attempt to do some geology stuff on that as well. I think the other thing that I think that's probably coming is the yellow book. Isn't that far away. They're starting to sort of, I'm on sort of a committee that looks at this a bit, but they're starting to look at sort of developing that as an electronic book, which I think would be really good if they get to that stage. I don't know how far away it'll be, where you can actually go and look at structure rather than trying to decide which lump it is in the book, which is a bit more abstract, if that makes sense. So some of those things I think will become clearer as they get that better developed. I haven't, I think for me there's 6 or 7 of those things. If you sort of get your texture right, your color right, your layers right, your pH, and then you do something about your fragments and picking up whether there's models, and 6 or 7 of those are really key elements that when you're doing pits, if you can understand and get those consistent with what they're using in that yellow book, I think it's probably a good way to be, and people can sort of understand what you're talking about then. And that, but there is, there's a lot of stuff in there which probably, unless you're a real soil surveyor, you won't necessarily use that much, but there's those core elements that you want to sort of get your head around, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. And I think referring back to some of the soil characterization that's already been done that might be close by to where you are, at least help increase your general knowledge and confidence about describing the paddock that you might be in. I mean, I know soil can change very quickly in a small area, but it might give you a bit of confidence.
Yeah, I think it's also important understanding that even before you go out to the pit site, so that you have a bit of an idea what the key soils are in that district, so that you're not picking off something that's completely different, I suppose. So that if you're going to spend to get a pit sort of dug, analysed properly, some time for us to interpret it and write it up, you're looking at something like 5 or 6 grand probably before you start to do it properly. So it's worth doing that sort of background stuff right, and having a bit of an idea what you're looking for before you even get in the paddock, I suppose, is useful exercise.
Yeah, and that data, some of the soil characterization data, would that be in that the soil map app that's been created for iPads, and I think it's just been created for iPads.
Not sure on that. Some of it was on that. Some of it was on that GRDC one they had. Is that the same thing?
I think this is a CSIRO one.
Sorry, one. Don't know.
That's okay.
I haven't used that one. I mean, the one. Yeah, I mean.
Are you talking about Azurus?
No, it's called Soil App. I'll post it in the chat, and then you guys can have a look at it and see what you think. But it's I'm pretty sure it was developed by CSIRO, and it's for an iPad, and it's got these soil characterizations in it, and you can use it on the iPad. Sort of, I think it was to sort of be used in the field. So I'm not sure whether the base data is coming from Azurus and going into this soil map.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this set was on ASRIS originally. A lot of this stuff, it may not be quite this is constantly being updated, which probably, I'm not sure ASRIS is getting all the latest stuff. Yeah, which I haven't even talked about ASRIS, but that was pretty clunky, was my experience at times to use.
I think it's on the list. I think it's on the National Soil Strategy list, isn't it? So it may be. Thanks very much, Brian. I really appreciate your time and sharing that knowledge. That's fantastic. So we might move on to David and Rebecca, and I'm not sure what your plans are, you two, but I'm happy just to pass it over to you. And like I mentioned, David and Rebecca are both from Agriculture Victoria, and David's a long history with soil characterisation and getting that data, Victorian soil data, up onto Victorian Resources Online. So thanks, David.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to try and, I'm trying to share a screen and I'm having problems. So I might get Rebecca, hang on. Share. What I'm going to talk about is just sort of following on from Brian, and we had some examples of, of pits and things, but I wanted to be a bit more general. I can't work out where my screen's got to, so hang on. Share. No. You want to know about the latest? There we go. Can anybody see that?
So we can see your email. You're sharing your screen where your emails are, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me get rid of that. Hang on. Share screen again. Victorian Resources Online. Try that. How about that?
Yeah, perfect.
Yes. Oh, what a relief.
Well done.
Yes. Technology and I are not always compatible. We're sort of using, and if anyone wants to sort of jump in at any time, please do. Victorian Resources Online is sort of like a front end of, we have soils data, but you can see that we've got a list down the left-hand side, landform, land use, soils. And what I wanted to do initially was to just sort of, Brian touched on it towards the end of his talk there, because he had to be very specific about just knowing your context of finding, where you are, and as Brian said, so making sure that you're looking at somewhere representative, because I agree with Brian that, people don't realise how expensive it is to have a soil pit. It's worth it, but it's quite a cost. So you want to make sure that, you're putting it in the right place and it's relatively representative. So, things like, representative environment, because things like soil and vegetation are basically the result of environmental interactions over time. So in many cases, often the vegetation people want to know what the soil type is so they can interpret the vegetation, and the soils people want to know the vegetation so they can help interpret the soil. So it's quite interesting. Unfortunately, with a lot of clearing, we don't have that situation, so we're more reliant on the landform and the geology and so forth. So if I just and you can see that this is the general site, and Brian was talking about South Australia being divided up into the pastoral and the agricultural areas. In Victoria, we're divided up on basically water catchment areas. So we've got about 10 areas, and you can see in the second paragraph down that we've got all those sort of in blue, we've got all those sort of areas sort of map, which we'll go to in a minute, and I'll invite Rebecca to have give us an example, and if he wants to sort of throw questions in, they can. But just at the broad level, if I go into landform and there's landform description, and if I go into geomorphology, which gives the background of the sort of landform, if you like, and you can see that down the maps there, increasing complexity of the type of landform that you're dealing with. And the reason that's important for context is that you've got similar processes acting. So, for example, in that yellowy area on the right there, the Northwest Plains, that would link in with a lot of what Brian's talking about, in that you've got the dune systems and so forth. So a lot of the cropping areas, you know, the broadacre cropping is given the rainfall and the landform is in that area. But then you can look down, and I'll just click on the broad one, just you to have a look. Just something very broad there. So the northwestern dune fields and plains, and then you can work your way down. So depending on where you are, you know, there's different processes working up the riverine plain. So that's just a bit of background there. And I can talk, that's probably the subject of another talk at another time. If we go then straight back to soils at the broad level, at the statewide level, we have a soils map, which again is sort of stitched together by Mark Imhoff and myself a few years ago, about 7 years ago there, and that sort of gives you an overview of looking specifically at soils. And it's roughly at about 1 to 250 scale, but it sort of gives you an idea. So if you're in that brown area there, so for example, that brown area is a lot of soda soils, so that means texture contrast soils that have got sodic subsoils, and then that will help you hone in on the area or give you an idea of the area that you're going to have a look at. So that's an overview. But if you want to be specific, then we have to go back. We'll go back to the first page and just go back to our division of 10 catchment management regions, CMAs, and just will say, okay, where do we want to, where are we looking, where do we want to go to? So, for example, if we go to North Central, which covers the last one here, which covers Bendigo and Rebecca's area, we can see that we've got an image there which shows various things, and then there's various specific things, and you can see there that one highlight there is soil pits in the North Central region. So we can actually go specifically to what soil pits we have, and those potentially that could be there, but we haven't had them written up because of resourcing. So, for example, if they're sort of blue or whatever, then we can highlight them. And I'm looking for Rebecca because I don't know. Rebecca wanted to go to a specific site, and if we go to, I think we're talking about Sonata. So if we just pick one at random, because I'm not as organised as Brian as he was with his talk, and you can see that Brian showed an example that they had in South Australia of sort of like a sheet sort of description, and again here we have a description. This one will move on because it's not particularly agricultural, but that's good because it's a range of soils, and just sort of shows the range of soils that we have. But we have a general description. We have this Australian soil classification, and we can talk about classification later, because basically as Brian was sort of mentioning, we're talking about, movement of water and nutrients through the soil and whether the soils help or hinder those. So here we've got relatively shallow soil, and there's descriptions, and we've got pH values, and then we've got the characteristics, the sort of summary up the top in the key profile ones there, and then we have more specific data that you're seeing similarly in the South Australian examples, and we tend to concentrate on the top of the B horizon, at the top of the subsoil. The reason being is that the subsoil, and we'll see this in other examples, the top of the subsoil is usually the throttle of the water and gas nutrient movement going up and down through the profile, because it is a two-way thing, as well as the biological access and helping the soils. Mind you, looking at that topsoil, is probably it's only 5 centimeters, so it's pretty tough, and there's not a lot of nutrients. And then you look at the vegetation, and it's fairly thin and scrubby, and this may well have been turned over in the gold rush time, and it's taken over 100 years to recover. So that's in state forest. So that's one example. We'll try and find something that's a bit more agricultural. And it just so happens that we've picked up a brown soda sol, mottled brown soda sol, which happens to be the state soil of Victoria. Nothing pretty, but then that's what our farmers have to deal with. Australian farmers have to be very adaptive to deal with, unlike the red ferrosols, the red friable soils, and some of the alluvial soils and better soils that they have for growing crops in the US and Europe, but we have to deal with these types of soils. So we find that again, the pictures are really helpful, give you an idea as well as the descriptions, because we're getting more visual these days. Again, you can sort of colours there in brackets are the monthly colours, and again, we're sort of looking to see, whether there's going to be a problem for water movement as well as the effect on rooting depth. So we've got a fine sandy loam over a medium heavy clay. So it's a bit like you're going for a run down a road or so, or round the corner, and you suddenly hit a wall. What you're going to do? You have to go either side of the wall. So water is going to hit that top layer of the medium heavy clay and decide, where am I going to go? And, so I go sideways until I can find a way down, or seep down really quickly. So, and again, you can see this was done for a land care group, and I might, in terms, if anyone's got any specific, because I don't want to sort of rattle on for too long, if anyone's got any specific questions, but I might hand over to Rebecca to give her point of view from a practical point of view. But I can answer any questions you like on the ASC, soils, geomorphology. If you've got any questions either now or after the session, quite happy to have a chat. So in Victoria and South Australia and Southern New South Wales, they play AFL. So I'm going to handball to Rebecca to say a few words.
Thanks.
Come in,
Thanks.
Rebecca.
Thank you, David. That was a really good overview of some of the really useful information that sits on Victorian Resources Online. So David sits in our research group in Agriculture Victoria and has been really instrumental in a lot of the actual development of these soil pit data information sheets, and then being involved in getting it translated to online. So I've had the privilege of spending some time with David out in the paddock and going through some of those very detailed sheets that Brian put up earlier as well, and it's a really great way to get information. But I won't take too long. I'll just jump in and say, so I work in extension, and one of the really useful things about all this online data is that, unfortunately, you know, in situations like we're in at the moment, we don't always have the capacity to either get a soil pit dug or get out into the paddock before we go into an area and chat with farmers. So I work in soil extension, and my job is to talk about soil health with different groups out there. So I find it really useful before I go to an area, because I grew up in Geelong and I'm now based in Bendigo, so I'm starting to learn some of the soils in the area that I live in. But you know, if I'm going up to you know, Mildura, for example, they're really unfamiliar soils to me. So I find going into Victorian Resources Online and following that process exactly that David went through, where you go to the CMA region that you want to go to, you hone in on that map sheet, and then you look, okay, this is where I'm going to be doing the talk, or this is where we're going to be doing our trial site, whatever it is, and then getting up as many of the soil pits in that area as I can. And for me, this is a really good educational tool, because I can go in with a lot more knowledge and be a lot more prepared for some of those local issues and local soils. So, you know, especially with all the data that sits behind it. So there's been a lot of soil tests that have been done, and I can, you know, jump in, and if we don't have a soil test for the area that we're going to be doing the trial, or that I'm going to be doing the session, then I can get some information from here. And if you scroll down, David, as well, you can also see the management considerations. So I guess that's one of the ways that I use this data. Because yeah, we don't always have the capacity to jump in a soil pit beforehand and get ourselves familiar with what's going on. So I find it really valuable using all this historic work that's been done. And I note, Brian, you put in a comment that, you know, what happens with the future and more of this data and knowledge that we're going to be gaining, where does that sit and how does that fit in? So that's a really interesting discussion point, I think. But yeah, so I guess that's all from me. Just wanted to talk about, yeah, how I use the information, and it's great to have people like David and Brian around that have been involved in a lot of the information that's been developed in the past. So fantastic to have them on board.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, that was a really great overview from, yes, and thank you to David as well for really clearly showing us the steps and where to go, because I know there is a lot of information in that VRO website, which is fantastic, and it's just a matter of being able to know which way to go to get what you need quickly, and those management considerations are also really a fantastic resource to have there. So yeah, thank you both very much for sharing your experiences, and to Rebecca, yeah, thanks for sharing how you use that site and that information, which I think is really important, and to understand what's available on that site. And yeah, well done, David, for all those years of getting out and doing all those soil characterizations across the state, and then entering all that data and making it publicly available. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, it's I don't know whether it's a bit like Brian, but it's been a team effort. But getting to the stage that there were 10 green bottles, and now we're down to about 2. So that's why it's great to work with, and I think, you know, with Brian, with Amanda, and also with Rebecca and others, that it's good that we've got a few people taking up the mantle and using it, because, you know, we've tried to capture this. We don't want have to sort of reinvent the wheel and sort of build on this. And I think these sorts of websites are useful in the you can start to have a look without just getting overloaded by just sheer data. So a bit of presentations like this help, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. And some of these guys have heard from Michael Roach, who's at University of Tasmania, and he did some work over the last 18 months, really, because Richard Doyle's a soil lecturer at UTAS, and he couldn't get his students out into the paddock. So what he did was went and dug some soil pits, and Michael, who's works as a geologist and did a lot of digitization of the soil pits, so would go in and take multiple photos of the soil pit, and then used a program to stitch it all together. And so then the students ended up doing soil characterization online by using these stitched together soil pits and being able to go in, and Richard was able to put some voiceover on the soil pits, and so he would do the soil characterization and talk them through it, and then they would have the student would have another pit that they would have to go in and do. So we looked at that, which is like the next step, I suppose, of what we've got here is sort of flat data on a website, which is awesome, but being able to digitize a soil pit and make it sort of almost 3D, where you can immerse yourself in a pit without necessarily having to go out into the paddock. So I'd be interested to see, and that's sort of capitalizing on that $6,000, that initial $6,000 that's spent on going out and doing a soil characterization, and you probably need to spend another $6,000 by the time you take all the photos and stitch it together. And but you've got a product there that's very user friendly and can be used by anyone in the world. So just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, we do have a few examples of that Mark and somebody else sort of looked at, but we've only got a few of those because as you say, they're quite intensive, but they're quite useful. But unfortunately, I can't sort of stick my hand in and sort of grab some soil and sort of texture it, But
it's certainly You lose the smell and the feel and all that sort of.
Yeah. I tend to be old school.
There's plenty of sensories required for soil characterization too, I understand. Yeah. Any further questions or comments from the floor? And thanks, Rebecca, for popping in the link there to the Extension Oz soil moisture monitoring page. That's really useful. Thanks for that.
I have a quick question for, I guess, Rebecca. We're planning on doing a few farmer field days in this area, and I wondered about getting AgVic extension officers on the ground. It seems really difficult to, there's not enough of you, and it seems that COVID has made it even trickier. And I just wondered if you could sort of comment on how you can support our land care group, not just our land care group, obviously, all land care groups and farmer groups who would love to have that hands-on experience with AgVic staff.
Yes, yep, I'm happy to comment. So one of the things that we're doing is working out how can we translate what we do in a physical workshop to something that could be run online. And we all know it's not ideal, but it's the reality that we work in. And unfortunately, government is one of the more cautious workplaces out there as well. So we're often the last ones to be allowed to go out and to work in workshops and things like that. So we're currently in the process of delivering some online soil workshops to small groups and working out different ways how that can be useful. And so I guess a lot of it for us is being really clear in dictating before the workshop what resources the farmers will need to bring along. So bringing bringing along their soil, getting, you know, the rainwater and getting all the different things, and then going into running through that workshop online with someone like myself, you know, behind the camera, talking it through, using lots of videos, using, you know, different things, and trying to get people at home to do those things. And then I guess a follow-up with a in-person workshop down the line would be a kind of approach that we're going for. So we've had some good success with that. So the other ways that we've managed to do it as well is run it where we haven't been able to physically get there, but someone like yourself would be able to be with the Landcare group or the group and help them do the texturing and different things like that, with you know, extra instructions and support from someone like myself online. So we are hoping to be able to get out there more and run these workshops. So that's you know, one of the bread and butter of what I love to do is get out there and run these kind of workshops with farmers. And you're right, we're very low on the ground. There's not many of us left, but we are always happy to get out there and run soil workshops. But yeah, I guess it's about thinking more creatively at the moment about how we can do that, and how to make it beneficial, because as you know, mentioned, soil is about all the different senses. You know, you want to be touching it, you want to be smelling it, you want to be feeling it, and how can we translate that? So some of those virtual soil profiles and things like that, I think down the track will be really useful. And I think what we've learnt and has been highlighted is that we can reach really different audiences that we wouldn't necessarily through the online world. It doesn't, I think, isn't going to replace in person, but it's another thing that we have, that we can reach people who wouldn't, you know, whether it's physically or social anxiety, whatever it is, wouldn't be comfortable going to things in person, but are happy to sit there and learn. And so I think it's on people like myself who present the information to think really cleverly and creatively about how to target that. And so we've done a lot of work in making sure it's not just really boring online and a lecture, so how we can engage people. So I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, so I'm always happy to chat with people about, you know, how we can work with individual groups as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Rebecca. I might follow up with you for some ideas about how we can engage our Landcare members as well. So it sounds like you've been thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you.
Look, if you want the boring lecture, I can put my hand up for that. But if you want the real exciting stuff, you deal with Rebecca.
Oh, come on, David. Don't sell yourself short. You've got lots of good information to share. But thank you very much for volunteering yourself. It's fantastic to know. And yes, Aisha, you're not alone there. We're all putting our hands up for a bit of support out in the field. Yeah, we can't wait to get out there and get back into it again. That's for sure. So any other questions or comments? I understand we are a little over time now, so but if there's anyone's got a burning question, feel free to pop it in the chat or unmute yourself and just ask away. Otherwise, Beck's popped in her contact details in the chat, so that's great, and I'm sure Brian and Amanda and David would be happy to be contacted. I know Brian and Amanda do a lot of great work in South Australia with the grower groups over there as well. So it's fantastic. So since we are a bit over time, I will wrap it up. And thanks again to Brian, Amanda, David and Rebecca for being online and talking to you guys. It's really great. And like I said, I have recorded it, so there will be a wider audience participating, so they'll be able to catch up with these resources later on. So, and I will be in touch with participants with a survey and hopefully some news about how we can continue at least for, you know, perhaps till June 2023 if we can get the Australian government on board. So thanks very much, everybody. And yeah, appreciate your participation.